What would you do if the person who struck your 6-month-old child wasn't a stranger, but your own sister? And every member of your family sat in silence as if nothing had happened. Would you protect the image of family at any cost? Or would you risk everything to defend the truth? And how far would you go when silence itself becomes the real enemy? The slap that shattered Christmas last Christmas did not begin with the sound of bells or carols or the usual chorus of laughter that the Sterling family loved to parade. It began with a sound that still slices through me like glass, sharp, violent, and unforgettable. The sound of my 6-month-old son being struck across the face by my own sister, inside my parents' grand dining room, beneath chandeliers that had witnessed centuries of supposed tradition. I can still hear the silence that followed, a silence heavier than the blow itself. It didn't feel real at first, almost like a scene staged for one of Vanessa's endless reels, until I saw the red mark blooming on Lucas's cheek. He whimpered, not in the dramatic cries of pain that might have convinced the room something terrible had happened, but in the soft, confused whimper of a child who doesn't yet understand betrayal. That whimper broke me, and yet, no one moved. My mother, Patricia, did not drop her fork. My father, Sir Robert, kept his eyes fixed on his phone, scrolling as though the world hadn't shifted. My uncles adjusted their cuffs. My aunts sipped wine. And Vanessa herself, Lady Vanessa Sterling, the golden daughter, the family's crown jewel, smiled at the cameras she had installed in the corners of the dining room. Cameras to capture authentic family cheer, she had said. Authentic. The word was a lie before the night even began. You would think anyone would have spoken up. But here's the truth. Silence has always been our family's language. Secrets have always been our inheritance. That night wasn't an accident. It was a revelation. David, my husband, rose from his chair then. A colonel in the army, he carried authority the way others carry their surname. His presence filled the room, commanding without force. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His words fell like judgment. Turn the cameras off and get out. The shock was visible, though still no one moved. Not even Vanessa. She smirked as though daring him to push harder. My parents shifted uncomfortably, not because their grandson had been struck, but because their carefully polished illusion was when I understood. When I in that house wasn't truth or love or safety. What mattered was the image, the facade that Lady Vanessa had built, the family's mask of civility, and the empire of denial behind it. Still, what gnaws at me most isn't the slap itself. It's the silence that followed. The way the room, filled with people who claim to love us, chose indifference over honesty. The way the adults, protectors in theory, let a baby's pain vanish under candlelight and tradition. That silence is the real crime, and it is in that silence that the real story begins. Have you ever wondered what a family will sacrifice to protect its image? Have you ever asked yourself how many lies can be told before truth suffocates? That night, I stopped wondering. I started taking notes. The cameras clicked off eventually, but not before they captured what no one could erase. A family heirloom, the oak high chair with the Sterling crest, sat beneath my son, holding not just his tiny body, but the weight of generations. It had cradled nobles, scholars, heirs. Now it bore witness to violence, a symbol no one wanted to acknowledge. Why do I begin with this detail? Because that chair, that slap, and that silence are the keys to everything that followed. If you understand that moment, you understand the empire I was forced to confront. An empire not of wealth or power, but of gaslighting, of carefully rehearsed narratives, of decades spent erasing the inconvenient truths that threatened the Sterling brand. That night marked a point of no return. And as you listen to what happened next, ask yourself, if your child had been struck and the room fell silent, what would you do? Would you bow your head, stay loyal to blood, and keep the facade intact? Or would you rise as David did and challenge the empire of silence? I didn't know then how far this would spiral. I didn't know that Vanessa would weaponize social media or that my parents would accuse me of hysteria. I didn't know that the slap would unearth decades of buried stories, whispered accounts of children bruised, cousins silenced, neighbors dismissed. I didn't know the cost of stepping outside their mask, but I did know one thing. With a clarity that felt both terrifying and liberating, the rules had changed. I could no longer be the quiet sister, the one who absorbed the cruelty and smoothed it over for the sake of appearances. Lucas's red cheek was my line in the sand. And so, when David told Vanessa to leave, he wasn't just expelling her from a dining room. He was tearing open a truth my family had spent decades burying. This is where it begins. With a single slap, a stunned silence, and a decision that would unravel the Sterling dynasty from the inside out. Listen closely, because nothing that follows makes sense without this night. And yet, even now, I find myself wondering, what frightened them more? That Vanessa struck my child, or that David and I refused to stay silent? Perhaps the real mystery isn't the violence you can see. It's the violence that hides in plain sight, cloaked by etiquette, wealth, and denial. That's the story I am about to tell you. And trust me, once you've heard it, you will never look at silence the same way again. The family's mask of silence. When we left that dining room, I thought the worst was behind us. I thought the slap, the silence, and David's command had carved a clean break between us and the family's sickness. But sometimes the storm begins only after you've walked out into what feels like calm. And sometimes the quietest voices carry the sharpest blades. 3 days later, the phone rang. Patricia's voice drifted through the receiver, honeyed, fragile, carefully crafted. "Natalie, darling, we need to talk." Vanessa feels terrible. She didn't sleep at all. She's desperate to apologize, but she can't if you won't answer her calls. Her words dripped with the performance of concern. But beneath them was a familiar current, the suggestion that I was the problem, that my silence was cruel, that my refusal to forgive was tearing the family apart. Did you notice what was missing? Not one word about Lucas, not one acknowledgement of what had been done to him. Only Vanessa's sleepless night. Only her suffering. How many times had I heard that same melody growing up? "Don't be dramatic, Natalie. Don't overreact. Try to understand Vanessa." It was a script rehearsed over decades, and I was expected to fall into my role once more. The accommodating sister, the quiet absorber of wounds, the keeper of peace. But something in me had shifted. The sound of that slap, the mark on Lucas's cheek, the stillness in the room, they had rewired me. I could no longer be their scapegoat. I told Patricia calmly, "She struck my baby. He is 6 months old. What is there to discuss?" The silence on the line stretched long, like a rope pulled taut. Then came the sigh, sharp as glass. "You've always been dramatic, sweetheart." There it was. The blade. Not at my throat this time, but at my sanity. A subtle cut meant to bleed me of certainty, meant to make me doubt my eyes, my instincts, my very grip on reality. Gaslighting. A word I had never dared apply to my family until that moment. And as if on cue, more voices followed. My father, Sir Robert, with his carefully chosen, measured words. "Sweetheart, we need to be objective. Vanessa says she didn't mean to hurt him. She was just firm. A tap, really. Look at Lucas. He's fine. Children are resilient." Resilient. A word that dismisses pain, that justifies neglect. A word that says, the child will survive, so why should the adults change? I began to wonder, were they even talking about Lucas anymore? Or were they defending the only child they had ever really cared to protect, Vanessa? That was the pattern, wasn't it? Shock, excuse, redirection, pressure. I could see it forming around me like a cage, and every bar of that cage had been welded years before, in countless moments when truth had been sacrificed at the altar of family harmony. And yet, something inside me rebelled. The truth wasn't slippery this time. I had heard the crack of the slap. I had seen the red mark on my son's cheek. No amount of soft voices or parental sighs could make me unknow what I knew. But then Vanessa herself called. Her voice trembled, fragile, childlike. "Nat, I feel horrible. I haven't eaten or slept. I don't know how I could have handled it differently." For a moment, my guard lowered. The sister I once loved seemed to peek through the polished influencer facade. Could this be real remorse? Could there be healing? But the illusion shattered as quickly as it appeared. "I didn't really hit him," she insisted. "I just touched his cheek to get his attention. Maybe because everyone was tense, it seemed worse than it was." I gripped the phone until my knuckles went white. "Vanessa, there was a mark. There was a sound. He stopped crying because he was in shock." Her reply was silk wrapped around poison. Maybe the mark was from crying. Maybe the sound was louder because the room was quiet. Maybe you're blowing this out of proportion. Maybe. Each word chipped at my reality. Was she rewriting the scene in real time, or had she convinced herself it was true? And here is where the real confrontation began. Not with Vanessa, not even with Patricia or Robert, but with myself. Would I let them pull me back into the fog of doubt? Or would I trust the clarity that had burned through me that night? A warm welcome to you all from Dran. If you've been pulled into this story, if your chest is tightening as mine did, make sure to subscribe. Your support gives us the strength to bring more stories like this to light, stories that pierce the silence families work so hard to maintain. But back to that silence. It was spreading. My phone buzzed constantly. Messages, calls, pleas. Each one carried the same refrain. Vanessa didn't mean it. You're overreacting. David is too rigid. Don't let this ruin the family. And yet, what was their definition of family? A circle where silence meant loyalty? A place where a baby's suffering could be dismissed if it inconvenienced the narrative? That week, I began to document everything. I wrote down each word, saved each message, traced each lie. And as the evidence piled up, a terrifying realization grew inside me. This wasn't about one slap. This was about a system, a machine designed to protect Vanessa at any cost, a machine that demanded my silence as fuel, but I was done feeding it. Still, the cost of defiance pressed down on me like a storm gathering at sea. What if I was wrong? What if I was too rigid, too unforgiving? What if the family was right and I was the one tearing us apart? Tell me, what would you do? Would you surrender for the sake of peace? Or would you fight, knowing the cost? Because I chose to fight, and I had no idea just how high the cost would be. Gaslight Empire. It was the third call that broke something inside me. Not Patricia's pleading, not Robert's measured voice, but Vanessa herself. My sister, the one who had raised her hand against my son, now turning her voice into a trembling symphony of innocence. Nat, I've been so sick with guilt. I can't eat, I can't sleep. I just want things to go back to how they were. For a fleeting second, I felt the pull of her words. Childhood memories tugged at me. Two sisters whispering secrets under the covers, sharing stolen laughter in a world that felt too heavy for children to carry. But then came her twist, her pivot. I didn't hit him, Nat. I just touched him. Maybe everyone was so tense it sounded worse than it was. Maybe the mark you saw was from crying. Maybe you misinterpreted. How many maybes does it take to unravel the truth? How many times must a mother doubt the evidence of her own eyes before she becomes complicit in the lie? I stood there, gripping the phone, realizing this wasn't a conversation. It was a trap, a performance, rehearsed and perfected over years. Vanessa wasn't apologizing. She was rewriting. And in her rewrite, I was the overprotective mother, the dramatist, the villain who threatened to ruin the family name. But what she didn't count on was my refusal to play the part anymore. That night, I began writing everything down. Every word, every pause, every sigh that carried accusation instead of empathy. I became the scribe of my own survival. And in those notes, patterns emerged. Patterns I had been too blind, too desperate for belonging to see before. Each family crisis had followed the same arc. Vanessa's offense, the family's excuse, my silence. Over and over, a cycle polished to a shine. And then came the first twist, a message from my Aunt Linda. Short, sharp, impossible to ignore. This isn't the first time. Call me. My heart hammered as I dialed her number. Linda's voice carried the weight of decades. Natalie, there were other children, other times. Vanessa has always been like this, and your parents have always covered for her. The world tilted beneath me. She spoke of cousins pushed too hard, babysitting incidents whispered away, accidents reframed as misunderstandings. My parents hadn't simply excused Vanessa. They had cultivated her impunity. They had raised her to believe that harm could be erased with excuses, that cruelty could be reframed as clumsiness, that family would always protect her, no matter the cost. And in that moment, the ground beneath me gave way. It wasn't just about Lucas. It was about generations of silence, about the way power had been distributed in our family like poisoned wine, each of us drinking our portion until we no longer knew truth from fiction. But the poison hadn't reached me this time. Not fully. I had David. I had Lucas. And I had clarity. Tell me, What would you do if you discovered the harm wasn't a single act, but a legacy? Would you still cling to forgiveness? Or would you rise with fury against the very foundation of the family you once trusted? The second twist came not from family, but from a friend. Chloe, my neighbor at Fort Henderson, sent me a message that chilled me to my core. Saw Vanessa's Instagram story. Are you okay? I opened the app with shaking hands. There she was, perfect lighting, curated captions, a smiling recount of family drama and forgiveness. Her version of Christmas dinner? A minor disagreement. Parents too rigid. A baby's fussing blown out of proportion. And she, the heroine, gracefully choosing forgiveness. Do you see it now? The slap wasn't just an act of violence, it was a threat to her brand. Lucas wasn't a baby to her. He was a prop. And when the prop didn't perform, she punished him. And then, when the story risked slipping from her control, she spun a new one for her audience. Thousands strong, each follower feeding her ego with comments of admiration. What kind of woman crafts a narrative while the red mark of her hand still lingers on a child's cheek? The fury inside me shifted into something sharper: resolve. I began compiling screenshots, saving posts, building a record not just of that night, but of every way Vanessa had mined our lives for content. There it was, our wedding, David's deployment, my pregnancy, all twisted into glossy lies that never once sought my permission. But the third twist came from within my own home. David, my steady soldier, returned one evening with a look I knew well. Calm on the surface, thunder beneath. I've spoken with legal counsel, he said. The military takes family violence seriously. This isn't just a personal conflict anymore. It could become a matter of protection, even clearance. It hit me then. The stakes weren't only emotional, but existential. Vanessa's actions had the power to ripple into every corner of our lives, including the very career that sustained us. Would you have the courage to confront not just a sister, but an entire system designed to protect her? To risk your standing, your stability, your reputation, simply for the truth? Because that was the moment I knew. There was no turning back. I couldn't unsee the patterns. I couldn't unhear the excuses. And I couldn't unfeel the sting of that slap, reverberating still through my son's tiny body. The confrontation had begun in whispers, but now it was moving into war cries. And just when I thought I had grasped the full scale of what I was up against, the fourth twist arrived. Vanessa's attorney sent me a letter. Formal, threatening, demanding I retract my defamatory claims, that I sign a statement declaring no assault had occurred, that I silence myself for her business, for her image. But truth, when it is burned into your bones, cannot be signed away. And so I prepared, not just to defend, but to strike back. Documentation, witnesses, patterns, evidence built not from vengeance, but from survival. The lines had been drawn. My family had chosen silence and spin. I had chosen truth and protection. And in the space between those choices, a battle was about to erupt, one that would test not only our loyalties, but our very understanding of what family means. So I ask you, when loyalty collides with justice, which side do you stand on? Because as for me, I knew the next step would be fire, and I was ready to burn. The Heiress Unmasked. The silence that followed Vanessa's legal threats was almost worse than the noise. For days, no calls, no texts, no social media updates. The family machine, once humming with excuses, explanations, and endless pressure, had gone eerily quiet, as if recalibrating. I should have felt relief, but instead I felt the prickle of unease, like standing in a field moments before a thunderstorm splits the sky. And then the storm broke. Not through family this time, but from outside. A call from Jessica Chen, a television producer. Her voice was clipped, professional, edged with curiosity. Miss Brooks, we've received some troubling information about your sister's family content. Before we proceed with any business arrangements, we need to know what really happened. In an instant, the veil lifted. Vanessa hadn't just been filming for Instagram, hadn't merely been curating a glossy holiday narrative. She had been auditioning for a reality show. Our Christmas dinner, our son's cries, our fractured family, it had all been raw material for her golden ticket. And the slap that cracked across Lucas's cheek had been, in her mind, a disruption to production, not an act of violence against a child. What do you do when you discover your life was never your own, but a stage set for someone else's ambition? When every laugh, every tear, every moment of vulnerability becomes currency for another's empire. I told Jessica the truth, not embellished, not softened. The cameras, the chaos, the slap, the silence that followed. Jessica thanked me with professional calm, but I heard it in her voice. The deal was already collapsing. Liability, reputational risk, child safety. Words that strike terror into networks. And then the phone began to ring again. Patricia, sobbing, begging me to retract, to clarify, to salvage Vanessa's chance. Robert, cold and sharp, warning me of the damage I was doing to the family name. And finally, Vanessa herself, pounding on my door, mascara streaking down her cheeks, screaming that I had destroyed her life. You don't understand, she spat. Years of work gone. Hundreds of thousands of followers, sponsors, all because you couldn't let one mistake go. But it wasn't just the words, it was her face. Rage, not remorse. Entitlement, not shame. And then the slip. The unguarded truth. I barely touched him, and only because he was ruining everything. Do you know how hard it is to create authentic content when no one cooperates? Authentic. The word rang hollow, grotesque. In that moment, the mask fell completely. She hadn't hit Lucas because she lost control. She hit him because he threatened her product. My son wasn't family to her. He was a prop who failed to perform. David stood between us, his voice low, steady. Leave now. You have no rights to this child. And if you return, I'll call the police. She left screaming, but I felt no fear, only clarity. Because David had recorded everything. Her admission, her fury, her slip into truth. Evidence, raw and undeniable. The twist was complete. The woman who had spent her life weaving narratives had just hung herself with her own words. Still, the fear lingered in me. What if she escalated? What if her attorney doubled down? What if my parents, so desperate to protect her, turned their venom fully on me? Every night I lay awake, listening for the sound of her car in the driveway, my body tense with the possibility of what might come next. But alongside the fear, something else stirred. Hope. Because for the first time, I was not alone in the fight. Linda had come forward with her stories. Sarah, my cousin, had corroborated hers. David had the support of his command, the full weight of military integrity behind him. And now, even the industry that Vanessa worshipped had turned its back, unwilling to gamble on a woman whose mask was cracking. Hope is a fragile thing. It flickers like a candle in the wind, vulnerable to every gust of doubt, but it is also stubborn, refusing to go out completely even when darkness surrounds it. And I clung to that hope, whispering to myself, we are not crazy. We are not overreacting. We are not alone. Tell me, have you ever been caught between terror and relief? Between the dread of what more could be unleashed and the fragile spark of knowing the truth is finally out? That was the paradox I lived in. Fear that Vanessa would strike again, hope that her power was finally unraveling. And perhaps if you've been carried this far into the story, you felt some of that tension too. If you have, if this tale has pulled you into its storm, then I ask something small but meaningful. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like. It may seem like a small action, but for us, it's a huge encouragement that fuels our passion to bring you even more captivating real-life stories. Back in my own home, watching Lucas sleep peacefully, I knew the battle wasn't finished. But the battlefield had shifted. The enemy wasn't just Vanessa anymore. It was the system that had allowed her to rise unchecked. My parents' excuses, my relatives' silence, my own years of compliance. They had all played their part in creating this monster. But monsters can be defeated, not with swords or fire, but with truth, with boundaries, with refusal to play the role they assign you. And as the night deepened, I realized the real twist wasn't Vanessa's downfall. It was mine. I was no longer the quiet sister, the overlooked daughter. I was the mother who would not be silenced. The woman who had found her voice in the echo of a slap. The truth teller who would fight, not just for her son, but for every child who had been told their pain was imaginary. The stage was set. The climax was near. And for the first time, I believed we could win. The family we choose. There are moments in life when the noise finally falls away, when the shouting, the accusations, the frantic scrambling of others to rewrite the truth all collapse into silence. Not the suffocating silence of complicity, but the kind that feels like fresh air after a storm. That is where I found myself months after the night that tore my family apart. It was a simple evening. Lucas had just learned to walk, wobbling unsteadily between David and me in our back garden, his laughter carrying into the dusk like music. There were no cameras, no staged moments, no audience but us. Just the three of us, breathing in the kind of peace I hadn't realized I'd been starved of. And in that instant, I felt something release inside me, like a knot that had been tightening for decades finally loosening. The Sterlings no longer called. No more endless messages, no more letters from attorneys. Vanessa had vanished into the digital ether, pivoting her brand to travel vlogs and carefully avoiding mention of family. Patricia and Robert retreated into their estate, surrounded by their antiques and their silence. I did not chase them, and they did not reach for me. For the first time, I understood what freedom really meant. But freedom is not without grief. There were nights I lay awake, mourning the family I had hoped to have, the parents I had longed for, the sister I once believed I could protect. Grief and relief sat side by side in my chest, reminding me that healing is not clean or linear. It is jagged, painful, and strangely beautiful. Do you know that feeling? The ache of missing something you never truly had? The longing for a love that existed only in your imagination? That was my companion in those months. Yet with each day, the ache dulled, replaced by something sturdier, something truer. Because here is what I learned. Family is not defined by blood or names etched into oak or portraits hanging in gilded frames. Family is defined by who shows up when the world caves in, by who shields you, not who demands your silence. Our chosen family began to grow. Neighbors who left meals at our doorstep. Soldiers from David's command who checked in, their loyalty extending beyond the barracks. Friends who believed me when my own parents did not. Slowly, I realized that while I had lost the illusion of family, I had gained something real. And in that realness, Lucas thrived. His laughter grew louder, his steps more confident. He would never remember the slap, but he would grow up in a home where truth was not negotiable, where his safety was not sacrificed for appearances, where love meant action, not performance. That, to me, was victory. Yet, I will not pretend it was easy. There were times I questioned whether I had done the right thing. Times when loneliness pressed so heavy I almost wished I could slip back into silence, accept the family's lies, pretend it had all been a misunderstanding. But then I would look at Lucas and remember the mark on his cheek, the silence at the table, the weight of history pressing down on me. And I knew there was no going back. Perhaps you've lived through something similar. Perhaps you've felt the pull of loyalty against the scream of truth. Perhaps you've wondered if standing up was worth the cost. If you have, let me tell you this. It is. The cost is steep, yes. But the cost of silence is steeper still. What kind of legacy do we leave our children if we allow harm to be excused, truth to be rewritten, pain to be dismissed? What kind of inheritance is that? I wanted Lucas to inherit something different. Not a name weighed down by secrets, not a tradition built on gaslighting, but a legacy of courage. A legacy that says, when someone harms you, even if they are family, you are allowed to speak. You are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to demand better. And in this, I found my own healing. For years, I had been the quiet one, the overlooked one, the daughter who swallowed pain for the sake of peace. But now, I was something else. I was a mother, a protector, a truth teller. I was someone who could look at her reflection and see not weakness, but strength. So here's the final truth I leave you with. Sometimes family is not who you are born to, but who you choose. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away, even when your heart aches, even when the world calls you cruel. Because walking away can be the first step toward freedom, toward healing, toward creating something better for those who come after you. And if you are listening now, if my story has struck a chord in you, then perhaps you know this truth already. Perhaps you have your own silence waiting to be broken, your own storm waiting to pass. If so, hold on. There is life on the other side of the storm. There is peace. There is freedom. There is love that does not demand you disappear to keep it alive. When I watch Lucas sleep now, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, I feel the weight of everything we endured. But I also feel the lightness of knowing we survived it, that we built something better, something real. And that, in the end, is the only victory that matters. So let this be my final offering to you. If you have ever doubted your worth, if you have ever wondered whether the truth is worth speaking, let my story remind you, it is. The truth may cost you everything you thought you had, but it will give you everything you truly need. And in that exchange, you will find not only survival, but freedom. The story I've shared with you is not just about a slap at a Christmas table. It is about the silence that followed, the years of complicity that allowed harm to fester, and the courage it takes to finally break free. For me, it was never only about my sister's hand across my son's face. It was about generations of denial, about the way love can be twisted into performance, about how easily families mistake loyalty for silence. That night shattered an illusion, but in the ruins, I discovered something more enduring: truth, protection, and the strength to build a family, not defined by bloodlines, but by action. What does it mean, then, to carry this forward? It means recognizing that love without protection is not love at all. It means refusing to excuse harm simply because it comes wrapped in the name of family. It means teaching our children that they deserve to be safe, to be heard, and to grow up in an environment where honesty is valued more than appearances. And it means looking honestly at our own lives. Where have we been silent when we should have spoken? Where have we allowed comfort to outweigh courage? The lesson is as painful as it is liberating. You cannot build peace on silence. True peace comes only from truth. Sometimes that truth will cost you the very people you thought you needed most. Sometimes it will leave you grieving. But in the end, it is the only foundation strong enough to hold the weight of a real life, a real love, a real family. And so, as you carry this story with you, I invite you to ask yourself, what silence in your own life needs breaking? What truth have you been afraid to speak? And what might it cost you if you never speak it at all? The answers may not be easy, but they may just change everything. If you found this story meaningful, I warmly invite you to join the Dran community, where together we uncover more real-life stories filled with mystery, tension, and lessons that matter. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to the channel. Your support is not a small thing. It is the encouragement that fuels us to keep creating more powerful, thought-provoking stories for you.